Hello, and welcome to Chapter 6. This is Dr. Randy Papke, and today we're going to be talking about metabolism. It's not what you think it is. There's a lot of chemistry that is involved in metabolism. So chemistry, energy, physics, all of these things are going to be what we're focusing on in this chapter. Life is all about energy. Cells are little chemical factories, and there's thousands and thousands of reactions that go on inside every cell of your body as long as you're alive. Cells take energy from the foods you eat, like sugar and fats. In this chapter and the next couple chapters, we will mostly focus on sugar, but it does get it from any food that you eat, using this process of cellular respiration. And they're going to then use that energy to perform work. And in this case, work has a very specific meaning, and we'll talk about that in a second. What you see over here is this lovely picture of a firefly. This firefly uses energy to do work. So the first big concept that we're going to do is we're going to talk about the definition of metabolism, or start to get into that in this first part of the lecture. So metabolism is basically all the chemical reactions that happen within your cells. And it's actually like something called an emergent property. And what that means is that metabolism is something that happens as a result of all of the orderly reactions that happen in the molecules. I grabbed this nice picture of fat metabolism just so that you can be aware that it's not just sugar that we focus on when we eventually get into cellular respiration. It's lots of things, but you can see it's a pretty complicated pathway. So Chapter 6, Part 1, we're going to understand energy and metabolic pathways in this particular part of the lecture. A metabolic pathway starts when you have a specific molecule, and it ends with a different specific molecule. So here's our starting molecule A, and here's our pathway, and it ends with this product D. But in biology and metabolic pathways inside your bodies, inside your cells, every single step in this pathway is mediated or catalyzed by an enzyme. So to get from A to B, we need a specific enzyme, which we're calling enzyme 1, and that's going to do reaction 1. To go from B to C, we need a different enzyme, and from going from C to D, we need a third enzyme. So all of those are parts of little steps along the way of a metabolic pathway. There's two basic versions of metabolic pathways. There's anabolic and catabolic. Catabolic pathways release energy by breaking down complex molecules like macromolecules into their simpler compounds. Some examples of this are when you break down fat for energy. This is energy that's going to be used for cellular work, and the one that we're going to be learning about, like in lots and lots of detail, is how glucose is broken down in the process of cellular respiration. Anabolic pathways are making pathways. They're building pathways. You might have heard of anabolic steroids with regard to muscle building. So it's the same kind of concept. This is a biosynthetic pathway, and it consumes energy to build complex molecules from simpler ones. We also use the term energy a lot in this lecture and in many of the upcoming lectures. Bioenergetics is the study of how energy flows through living organisms, how energy flows through ecosystems. And so I grabbed a picture here for you from the internet just so that you could see what a bioenergetic pathway is, flowing through many different living things in an ecosystem. Everything's interrelated. Everything gets its energy ultimately from the sun, but you have organisms like phototrophs and autotrophs, capturing that sun's energy and releasing oxygen and nice organic compounds that we then might eat. Our heterotrophs over here are chemotrophs. They use energy from other living things, and they release carbon dioxide and water. Now, it's not to say that phototrophs don't release carbon dioxide. They do, but when we're talking about this whole big bioenergetics, this is the simplified version of that. And it's useful to see the simplified version. We'll be getting into many, many details as we go along. So there are different forms of energy, and energy is simply the capacity to cause change. I love this cartoon I got off the internet. It looks at the different stages of energy, and we'll go into quite a bit of detail on those in just a minute. But I love that he's holding an apple here, and this apple is being held up. That's considered to be potential energy. As it's falling, that's kinetic energy. And then the friction of heating the apple where it hits the ground, that's thermal energy. So that's energy, all these different forms. Work is kind of the opposite of this free falling here. I mean, this is kinetic energy, and that's a form of friction when you hit the ground there with that apple, so friction. Work is opposing things, like opposing gravity, opposing friction. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the details on energy. I already listed a couple of these for you. Kinetic energy is energy associated with motion. So if something's moving, it's got kinetic energy. You throw a baseball, football, basketball, that ball has kinetic energy. Thermal energy is kinetic energy associated with random movement of atoms and molecules. So, if you think about the molecules as like individual basketballs, right, as they're moving around, and they do move around randomly, that's creating thermal energy. So it is a form of kinetic energy. The next one is heat. And heat is thermal energy in transfer from one object to another. So we think about heat as, you've got a heat source here and this water here, and the heat source is transferring to its energy to the object. And so that's not the same as thermal energy. Remember, thermal energy is random movement of atoms, but heat is this transfer of energy. That's the best way to really think about what heat is. Light is a type of energy that can be used to harness work as well, and we'll be talking about that quite a bit in a couple of chapters from now. So that was thermal energy and kinetic energy. We also had potential energy, and potential energy is energy that like objects possess because of their location. I love this diagram from your textbook. It really gets this across. This diver right here has a lot of potential energy because they're high up on the diving platform. When the diver goes into the water, this process of moving, that's the kinetic energy. And then, of course, we could talk about how their potential energy is really low when they're in the water, and the potential is higher when they're up on the board. As this diver climbs back up onto the platform, you're using energy of your muscles to make potential energy because you're going higher and higher and higher. So potential energy is really important. It's location. Chemical energy is a type of potential energy. Instead of being location physically, like how high up you are or something along those lines, it's the energy between the bonds of atoms. So those bonds have a lot of tension, and so they have a lot of potential to release energy. So we say potential energy. Energy can be converted into one form or another. I just stepped you through that, going from potential energy to kinetic energy, and having high potential energy and low potential energy, and converting back into potential energy over here. There are two main laws of thermodynamics, which you've probably heard of. Thermodynamics is just the study of how energy gets transformed from one form into another. And in an open system, And all that an open system means is that we're thinking about a large system where energy and matter is being transferred between the system and its surroundings. Like in an open system, energy is constantly coming into that system. In an isolated or closed system, the exchange doesn't happen with the surroundings, and so whatever energy that happens in that system stays in that system. Living things are open systems. We get energy from the things that we eat, and the things that we eat get energy from the things that they eat, or maybe you're eating plants. Hopefully you're eating plants. It's good for you. Plants get their energy from the sun. So we're an open system. Again, there's two laws of thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics says that the energy in the universe as a whole, like from one edge of the universe to the other edge, the energy in the universe as a whole is constant. Energy can be transferred and it can be transformed, but it cannot be created or destroyed. And sometimes we call the first law of energy the principle of conservation of energy. We're conserving energy because all the energy that exists in the universe is here right now as we speak. The second law of thermodynamics says that energy transfer, as you're transferring energy from one form to another, that we learned about in the first law, what that does is it increases entropy in the universe. So the second law is all about entropy. And entropy is just a measurement of how disordered things are. So you can have highly ordered structure and you can have less ordered structure. So lots of disorder. Entropy is like disorder. So the more disordered a system is, the more entropy it has. Scientists use the term disorder to describe how that energy disperses and how much energy is present, the different levels of energy. So the second law of thermodynamics says that every time you have a transfer of energy from one form to another, as you're passing energy on to the environment, it becomes less and less organized. And heat is one of the least organized forms of energy. There's not a lot of organisms that can use heat to make themselves run chemical processes and things along those lines. So this bear here is running along trying to get a fish or something. I don't know what it's doing. It's having fun. But as it goes along, it's releasing heat. And it's releasing carbon dioxide and water. Those are much less organized than the original molecules that they started out with, glucose or fat or something along those lines. So the heat and the carbon dioxide, those are less organized. The second law of thermodynamics also says that this is, it's basically a spontaneous process. It occurs without energy input. And it can happen quickly or slowly. However, what is also interesting is that if you have energy input, you can actually get more and more organized. So as long as energy is being input, you can have order and you can have organization. Living things are highly organized, and so we're constantly getting inputs of energy. And so we just have to have that energy. And again, we get that from food, the food that we eat. Biological order and disorder is central to understanding the way living things work. Cells, even whole organisms, create ordered structures from less ordered structures in our bodies, in our cells. So we're going against entropy. It doesn't mean we're violating the second law of thermodynamics, and I'll talk to you about that in a second. But it just means that we have a constant input of energy. Living things replace ordered forms of matter and energy with less ordered forms. And if we think about this on a large scale, you could think about this at the level of the ecosystem. Again, I've showed you some variation of this already, but energy from the sun passing through the ecosystem, that's important for how life works. It is a common misunderstanding that life doesn't make sense because it violates the second law of thermodynamics. And this is really just not true. This is a great cartoon of somebody saying, hey, you know, nice try, evolutionist. Second law of thermodynamics disproves evolution. And the little caption is important. Life on Earth can't get more complex because that would require energy, and the sun doesn't exist. Like, of course the sun exists. Of course we get all of our energy ultimately from the sun. Well, that's the end of my first part of Chapter 6 lecture. Join me with the part 2 in the next video.